happy to introduce Desiree Franz. So she is from a company called SambaSafety, which TVC Pro Driver recently partnered with. So Samba does a number of different things, but for the purpose of today's call, we're really going to focus on the safety video lessons that they provide to a number of fleets across the country. So I had the pleasure of working with them in my previous career when I was selling technology, but they were formerly known as ITI ProTread. So some of you may have heard of them, but now they were purchased by Samba. So Desiree will probably talk a little bit about the history of the company and kind of where they're at today. But with that said, we're going to treat this as really an educational session. Really want to, just inform you guys of some of the capabilities and some of the benefits of SambaSafety, and then we'll open it up to questions at the end. So as we're going through it, feel free to type your questions in the chat, and then as we get to the end, we'll go through those series of questions. But with that said, I want to introduce Desiree Franz. So Desiree, welcome to the webinar. Appreciate you joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Nick. I'm so excited to be here. I'm so excited for our new partnership. A little bit about me. I have been with SambaSafety actually for a year tomorrow. I got my start actually with instructional technologies almost 7 years ago. A little history about ITI. We got our start in the industry almost 27 years ago in the simulator side of driving. And then it evolved into an online training platform, doing training from heavy duty, which is where our bread and butter is, of course. You'll see as we talk about content that primarily the content is all heavy duty focused. But then we also do training all the way down to your sedan drivers and the gray fleet space. And then in March of last year, we were acquired by SambaSafety. Samba has a lot of history with license and CSA monitoring. A little company called Vigilo was purchased by SambaSafety in 2017. So we have a fairly decent footprint in the heavy duty industry from a safety standpoint. I'm going to go ahead. I have a couple of slides prepared, of course. We'll get through some of these, probably not all of them. So yeah, we'll kick it off.
Awesome. Thank you, Desiree.
Yeah. So when we talk about safety training, and I'm sure everybody here has, in some capacity, either taken safety training or provided safety training. And one of the most common things that I hear from clients by the time they get to me is, how do we fix this issue? They've already had an issue. And primarily those issues are costs of crashes and incidents. Normally, critical crashes, what we see from most of our clients, both on the insurance side and CSA, is that these critical crashes are so much more expensive. And we define a critical crash as rear ends, lane changes, side swipes, loss of control of the vehicle, and issues at intersections primarily. And then also these non-critical crashes. So one place that we're really able to make a big difference is, of course, in these critical crashes through your driver behavior, but also these non-critical crashes. These tend to be smaller issues like slips, trips, and falls. Workers' comp is a huge cost to the company, and it's where we can make the biggest impact, or a huge impact, because we're modifying those behaviors and keeping training at the forefront of everybody's mind. So like I said, crashes aren't the only cost. Crashes are usually what gets people to me to talk about training and looking at implementing a remedial program. But crashes aren't the only costs. You're looking at, some hard costs like increased insurance premiums, higher fuel costs, idle time, equipment wear and tear. That workers' comp claim is a huge one. Poor driver retention, late deliveries, operational workarounds, and then administrative burdens. So you have crashes that are kind of the top of the iceberg, but then you have all of these other costs that are just below the water. And those are driving a huge amount of costs for companies. And of course, as you have larger companies like Pilot Thomas is a company that we have worked with for years and done multiple case studies on. And they have a very solid footprint. They've got a very strong safety culture. But we also work with a lot of smaller companies in that 5 to 10 driver range, where a single crash could potentially be much more impactful to their business than, say, a company like Pilot Thomas. So when you think about this in terms of training and how we can help mitigate some of these risks and costs, specifically to workers' comp, with workers' comp, what we've seen through our case studies and data is the average cost is between $36,000 and $47,000 per incident. And I know that I can't actually talk to any of the people that are watching this. I'd love to ask you guys, what that workers' comp incident rate looks like, but for most companies, it's fairly often. And so you're seeing that $36,000 to $47,000 initial cost, but then there's the additional cost of that administrative burden and of that cost to rehire somebody to start driving that truck that's not being driven now because that driver's out on workers' comp. And so a thing like training is a small piece of the puzzle to make your drivers safer, so that you're seeing that risk and incident rate go down. Anything that you would add to that, Nick? Sorry, I know I'm talking a ton.
Yeah, no, I think it's really good, right? So, because you clearly have an impact on multiple different areas, right? A lot of these are going to be soft dollar savings, right? So it's not like we can point to a hard dollar, because we're trying to avoid these things from happening, and nobody knows when these things are going to happen or if they're going to happen, right? But it's all about putting the right processes in place to potentially avoid any of these things happening down the road, right? So it's just being proactive with your approach.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you use the word proactive, because so many times when companies implement a training program, it's a huge boulder to really overcome in the business, because it seems like a slap on the wrist of we caught you having these incidents or crashes or whatever the case may be. And it can really set a negative tone with specifically the drivers that it's remedial. And when you are proactive with training, it sets the tone with the entire company that we're going to do this safety training. Safety is important to us, not because we're just looking to save money, but we want our drivers home safe at the end of the day. We want to make sure that everybody plays a part in that, and doing it proactively is definitely one of the best practices that we see with a majority of our fleets.
Yeah, and so you have retention on your list here, Desiree. So in your experience, because that's one of the biggest things that that everybody faces, like the biggest challenges that everybody faces today, right? It's just recruiting and retention of drivers, and it doesn't matter the size of the fleet, everybody has those challenges. So in your experience, how much of the retention do you actually have an impact on? Are you seeing a lot of fleets that are leveraging some of these proactive approaches, having a better experience with retention, or just drivers specifically looking to go to a company that has the correct or some of these processes and procedures set up?
Yeah, absolutely. And I do have a slide on here that I'm going to show you with all of those data things. So please ignore that I'm going to skip ahead. We'll come back to some of these. But results, 73%. 73% of drivers that are either at risk or high risk are able to be retained within a company when you're intervening. What does intervening mean? Well, whether you're monitoring with a company like SambaSafety or you're pulling annual MVRs, as soon as you're identifying who those risky drivers are, you're able to go in with safety training and having those conversations. And we have found through the companies, the 15 million drivers that we work with, 73% were able to be retained at the company. Yeah, it's a huge number. A couple of other statistics, since we're on this slide anyway. I love data. What the data tells us, that when we're looking at these companies that we work with and the different solutions they're implementing specifically to safety training, our companies are seeing a 22% reduction monthly in violations, 14% reduction monthly in crashes, and then 32% reduction in company risk profile events. risk profile events specifically to anything that would be indicated on an MVR for a driver. It's a huge reduction. And to go back a couple of slides here, the reason those numbers are so high is the main causes of crashes are driver performance, ultimately. It's not the only reason by any means, but when we were looking through data with FMCSA and the American Trucking Research Institute, 87% of crashes are driver performance. You've also got the vehicle and the environment, and then we can break that down even further and have, recognition of a situation. 38% is the decision that driver is making in the moment. And then when you have a driver that has an incident, those people are much more likely to have another crash or incident happen within 12 months of that initial incident or crash. And when you look at a lot of this data that we've pulled from ATRI, a lot of those crashes or incidents that are happening are able to be mitigated through safety training. Things like reckless driving, failure to yield. Now, not all of these are going to be as easy, of course, to solve with safety training, but a lot of the smaller incidents, it's able to be remediated through safety training. The interesting thing, though, when you think about safety training and implementing a program like this, is it's not necessarily the content. We talk a lot about the frequency of training, and this is huge. When you look at this particular case study that's based off of these 5 CSA basics, we're measuring the entire industry, all SambaSafety clients, and I apologize, this is a little dated, it still says ITI. And then you're looking at ITI clients with at least 4 courses per year per driver. And these numbers go down substantially, especially in comparison to the entire industry. So as you think about implementing a training program, know that it's not a one and done. It's something that to get the most out of it is going to be done throughout the year, not only for the content, but just to have that constant reminder that you're always focused on this safety culture.
Yeah. And this is why, so I think our services really go hand in hand. That's why I'm so excited about the partnership, right? Because, the folks on the call and our TVC customers, they're leveraging our services to really go out and fight those citations or violations when they occur, right? But, fighting them, it only does, so much, it'll help, clear things off the record. But, we want to address the root cause, right? We want to prevent those things going forward. So now when you see like, okay, I've got, drivers that, received a speeding ticket. Now we can, with a partnership through Samba, we can assign those trainings that might address some of those things that could potentially prevent that from occurring in the future, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it ultimately becomes a, of course, much safer environment for the company, but the ROI, it's substantial. And that does take time. I know we talked about this before, Nick. One of our favorite quotes is, how do you have an ROI on a crash that never happens? Yeah. And it is difficult because you're kind of just sitting and waiting to see, if you've been collecting and tracking all of that data, how do you show that ROI and what are those cost savings? And that's like a couple slides ago that you're thinking about. There's so much more to it than just reducing your crash.
Right. And you look at, just the impact on CSA, right? So, because, that's, a lot of the things that we're trying to drive as well. Just looking at the industry statistics, so the rest of the industry versus, the folks that are actually leveraging training, and to see the dramatic shift in scores. That's pretty incredible to see. Yeah,
absolutely. One thing that I also like to bring up, is because it becomes so focused on the crash avoidance or the incident remediation. There's a lot of other use cases for the training, and I hope it's okay that we get into this a bit. But a lot of our clients use this for that proactive training, their monthly safety meetings, they use it for onboarding. Onboarding is probably our number one cost savings use case with this training. Most companies will have a 2 to 4 day onboarding for new drivers. A lot of companies still do everything in person. And where we've been able to make a huge impact is as companies are bringing new drivers on board, they're able to assign a lot of this training beforehand, where the driver can take it from their cell phone or tablet or on the website, go through our defensive driving program before they even step foot in the office. And so once you are on site, you're really able to have more of a conversation with the driver of, okay, you took this training, so we've kind of level set, you've got a fresh start, and you can dive more into the content and answer questions. And that's going to do a few things. And this goes both for proactive and remedial training, where you want to make sure that that driver hasn't just done this as a check the box activity, that they really understand the content. You've got documented conversations, you have documented certificate of completions for all of these trainings, and that really brings a lot of protection to the companies. I don't know if you guys have heard very much about this whole nuclear verdict issue going on right now, but it's rampant in the industry. And so any extra level of protection that we can provide in a litigation situation is just, it's so helpful to be able to show that documentation if you ever have an incident, and then having that extra layer of protection that you're working directly with the driver, you're having the conversation, you're coaching the drivers if there's any misunderstandings. It goes a long way.
Yeah, and you might be getting into this, Desiree, but I mean, from a workflow perspective, I mean, typically, how many lessons will a driver take throughout the year? I understand we'll have remedial training, but I'm guessing there's the ongoing training aspect of it as well. Is it a once a quarter thing that we want drivers to take a safety lesson, or is it once a month? What is the frequency of that?
Yeah, most commonly I see quarterly. Most of our clients will, outside of their onboarding training and whatnot, they will have a quarterly safety meeting. Most commonly, those clients that are doing that will assign a training that's maybe a hot topic for them at the moment. Drivers will watch the training, and then they'll all get together, now that we can in person, and have a discussion about it and how it applies to that company in particular or their particular situation.
Got it. And from a technology standpoint, you mentioned the platforms, when they're coming in pre-onboarding, right? They can watch a lot of this stuff via tablet or computer or smartphone. I'm guessing the ongoing training, the way I was used to using it in the past was through the ELD system, right? So, I mean, everybody that's, on the phone right now has ELDs in their trucks, and I'm guessing you guys partner with a vast majority of the ELD providers out there so they can leverage that existing technology to watch the safety videos when they're parked at a truck stop or something, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Probably 5 years ago, there was some technology that we weren't able to make the training available on because it wasn't native to the device. But I think at this point, most devices are either iOS or Android operating system. Right. And if they're not, you have the ability to download the app.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Perfect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of companies will use that when their drivers are on detention. It's a great time to make up some of the cost by piggybacking that training on time that maybe you're not unloading or you're not securing anything.
Right. Yeah, yep. Good point.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's see. Sorry, we jump around a little bit in these slides. Another thing that I wanted to bring up is, why is our training different? I'm sure people have been around long enough to know that there's all kinds of training available in the industry. But what makes ours different is our content is all created in-house, for starters. I'm home right now, but in our office, our developers, designers, editors, the people who do the voiceovers are right down the hall from me. Which is a huge benefit for us because we're able to create the content quickly. We can update the content quickly, and it stays fresh. You're not going to see a vehicle from 2005 in one of the videos, and we find it becomes very distracting. There's always one person that'll point out something that's outdated, whether it's a particular vehicle or a clothing style. So we don't mess with that at all. And the training is mastery based. So it's not a video that you're going to watch for 20 minutes and then take a metrics based test at the end. And we do that for a couple of reasons. One, it's engaging. The trainee is going to have to answer a question every 1 to 3 minutes. They can't move forward without answering the question correctly. And over the years, we have found that in those litigation situations, a true pass or fail training system doesn't leave a whole lot of margin open where a prosecuting attorney can come in and say, well, you got this part wrong, or you only got 80%. So it definitely closes that gap. And then the number of courses. So we have our courses built together in blocks. So you're going to cover maybe 10 different topics within one training. But the nice part about that is we can also break that out into much smaller chunks. So if you're wanting just a 2 to 3 minute video on seatbelts, we probably already have that in the library. So you can take it in small little chunks as a reminder, or you can take it in a full course.
Excellent.
Yeah. All right. Our results there. Okay. And that's all I have for you guys. Very kind of high level view of safety training, why it's important, how our current clients are using it. Is there anything that you would like to cover in addition, Nick?
Yeah, I mean, it might be helpful for folks to hear, a smaller size fleet that you may have worked with. I don't know if you worked with like a 20 truck fleet or 5 truck fleet, and how you basically got them implemented with SambaSafety and some of the results that they may have seen after implementing a proactive safety training approach.
Absolutely. And working when I was with ITI for as long as I was, that was primarily the industry that I was working with, is in that smaller 5 to 25, maybe 50 driver fleets. Gosh, I could rattle off a whole handful of them. Medline is a company that I've worked with for a long, long time. And we have really created this safety training program where they're very safety focused, of course. And so it was easier to implement our training. They expected the training, but they had an incident a number of years ago where they had a fire and they needed to move a lot of things very, very quickly, and a lot of hazmat related substances, I guess you could say, but they're not hazmat drivers. They didn't have any training on it. And they were able to acquire the equipment. And the gentleman that was working there at the time called us up and said, Desiree, I have this problem. We've got to move this stuff stat, but I don't have any hazmat drivers. We were able to get them that hazmat training immediately. And the next day, they were able to start moving things out, or maybe 2 days later. So that was something where they were able to step in very quickly to get what they need. On the bigger picture, though, where a lot of fleets are implementing training, the CSA scores, I think looking at that data that we had pulled, the CSA scores just being drastically lower than the industry as a whole, speaks volumes for when you implement ongoing training.
What is the typical time frame on when you start to see that score reduction with CSA, Desiree?
Gosh, 60 days typically, but it depends a little bit on a lot of factors. If your team is used to safety training, if you have resistors, or if they're open to training, if you've got seasoned drivers, or if you have newer drivers that are just out of school. But I would say typically right around that 30 to 60 day mark, especially when you think about things like workers' comp. And those costs, those are very, very quick turnaround time.
Yeah, that makes sense. How about, from an onboarding perspective, right? So, I mean, if I'm a fleet and I decide to implement SambaSafety videos, right? I mean, what does that typically look like? How long does it take me to get up and running? How many resources internally would I have to, make sure I have in order to, make sure everything runs as smoothly as possible?
Yeah, so we have an onboarding team that, of course, will be working with your team as we start onboarding people into the training, where we have checklists that we have pre-built that'll help support building a new onboarding program. We have recommendations of courses that you should have drivers take before they start driving for you. A lot of companies will use hosted services. So if you have standard documents like a policy handbook or any kind of notifications that you want the drivers to acknowledge before they start working for your company, we can drop that into the system. So a lot of that pre-work is done beforehand. It shaves off a lot of time, especially from an administrative standpoint, where you're not having somebody shuffle all the papers to people and make sure everything's signed, make sure the training's done. It's huge cost savings from that standpoint. Typically, we see between 1 to 2 days that we're able to shave off from an onboarding program.
Okay. So start to finish. I mean, if I purchase this, I mean, how soon can I be up and running, Desiree, would you say? A week, a month?
Oh gosh, a couple days.
Couple days. Okay.
Yeah, it's very easy. And especially if you're in that kind of 5 to 25 driver range, because likely you already have all of your driver's data. It takes us minutes to get it added to the system. So yeah, very quick implementation.
No, that's excellent. Outside of that, I mean, as far as like, I mean, if the folks on the call or the folks that are going to listen to the recording, if you want additional information on how you can, get signed up for SambaSafety, or just if you have additional questions, you can reach out to the ProDriver Sales Department. So the email and phone number is listed on this slide right here. I'd be happy to dig into detail, with the stuff with you guys. And just, answer any questions that you might have. But, with that, before we wrap, I'm not seeing any questions in the chat. We'll give it a couple of minutes here just to open it up for questions. Feel free to type it in the chat if you do have any.
Perfect. And Nick, I'll make this presentation available for you if anybody else loves this data as much as I do. I'm happy to share it with you guys.
That's perfect. Yeah, we did have a request, to share the slides. So we'll distribute all the content after the call.
Absolutely. One thing that I didn't mention for the training itself, a lot of people like to see the training beforehand. We do have the capability to assign demo credentials so that your ProDriver rep can walk you through what that training looks like before you actually commit to it.
That's perfect. Well, I am not seeing any additional questions come through. So we, like I said, we'll distribute the slides and everybody will get a copy of the recording. But if you do have questions, feel free to reach out to the ProDriver Sales Department. But with that, thank you everybody for joining, and everybody have a great rest of your week.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.